Welcome back to the final breakdown for Season 1 of Ahsoka. I was really happy with the finale we got. It left a lot open and has set up a lot to be answered in the future. Without further delay, let's get into the video. We begin at Thrawn's compound, where Morgan Elsbeth notifies the Grand Admiral that the cargo transfer is complete. This cargo is what I believe to be the bodies of deceased Night Sisters, which they wish to revive on Dathomir. Morgan is confident that the Jedi have little ability at this point to prevent Thrawn's return, however he remains on alert, still having plans in place to hinder their progress towards him. He references Ezra's heroics above Lothal that resulted in them being stranded on Peridia as a reason for his caution. The Great Mothers call Morgan to them, saying they will reward her with the Gift of Shadows. By what happens next, I'm assuming the Gift of Shadows is their name for the ritual turning Morgan into a fully fledged Night Sister as she pledges herself to their old ways. She opens her eyes, revealing pools of black, just like the Great Mothers, as well as more face markings. They conjure a blade for Morgan, calling it the Blade of Talzin. We've seen the blade once before, when Mother Talzin herself conjured it when dueling Mace Windu in the Clone Wars. The hilt definitely looks a lot different, but it's been close to 30 years since we last saw it. It could have changed. The episode is called The Jedi, the Witch, and the Warlord, a clear reference to Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The Notis are travelling in their houses, with the T6 Jedi shuttle hovering just above them. Inside, Ezra is with Huyang, constructing his new lightsaber. Huyang learns that Ezra's master was Kanan Jarrus, as he recounts his memory of Caleb Doom, as he was previously known. Ezra is searching for an emitter, when Huyang retrieves one identical to Kanan's. Huyang explains that he only ever had 2 of these, keeping this one in case Kanan ever needed it for a replacement. Sabine looks sad, watching on as Huyang comments on what a good student Ezra was. I believe this points to Sabine's feelings towards her master and apprentice relationship with Ahsoka, possibly jealous at the thought of not having had that experience with her. Curious about the dynamic between Sabine and Ahsoka, Ezra asks Huyang for some detail. Huyang explains that Ahsoka was fearful that Sabine was training as a Jedi for the wrong reasons after what happened on Mandalore, referencing the Great Purge of Mandalore, also known as the Night of 1,000 Tears. Ahsoka was concerned that if Sabine unlocked her potential, she would be dangerous. This is a feeling that would have been caused after seeing what her master, Anakin, turned into due to attachment. Sabine's potential here very well could be the result of her relation to House Vizsla, which was founded by the first Mandalorian Jedi ever, Tar Vizsla, who was the creator of the Darksaber. Sabine steps outside the ship to talk with Ahsoka, where she realizes that Ahsoka knows what happened on Cetos when she gave Baylan the map and went willingly. She expects Ahsoka to be mad or disappointed with her, however she's a bit surprised with her master's understanding attitude. Ahsoka tells her about Anakin, and how he would always stand by her, even when nobody else would, promising to do the same from now on with Sabine. The main example of this would be when the whole Jedi Order was against her when she was framed for treason against the Jedi. Anakin remained loyal to her, going as far as tracking down the real culprit, Barriss Offee. Ahsoka tells Sabine that being a Jedi isn't about using a lightsaber, urging her to train her mind and body, and to trust in the Force. Ezra steps out to show them his newly constructed lightsaber, as he spots 2 TIE fighters heading towards them. They fire upon their location where the T6 takes a heavy hit, almost dropping onto the Notis before Ahsoka and Ezra use the Force to keep it elevated. Sabine is on board the ship where she makes a quick fix, providing the engine with a short burst of power as she flies the T6 into the 2 TIE fighters, destroying them. This reminded me of the beginning of the Vader Down comic book storyline, where Luke Skywalker flies directly into Vader's TIE Advanced, before he can destroy any more of the rebel fleet, sending them crashing onto the planet's surface. The T6 crashes, however both Sabine and Huyang are fine. Captain Enoch informs Thrawn that the TIE fighters made contact with the Jedi, as Thrawn wants to know where they were located, using the TIE fighters as a mere tool, knowing there was almost a guaranteed chance they weren't coming back. It was probably a bonus to Thrawn that they landed a successful hit on the T6. Knowing that a ground assault is the only option available to the Jedi now, Thrawn prepares for one, making sure all bases are covered. Ahsoka and Sabine, alongside Ezra, ride their howlers to Thrawn's compound, dodging the gunfire from the Chimera, with all 3 using the Force to keep the door open long enough to narrowly make it inside. We get this epic visual scene of Ahsoka, Sabine and Ezra working together to take on the Night Troopers, dispatching them efficiently. This doesn't last for long, however, as the Great Mothers use their magic and raise the dead Night Troopers. They continue to advance up the stairwell, however they are slowed by these now zombified troopers. Due to the Jedi advancing rapidly, Thrawn asks Morgan Elsbeth to stay back to buy them a little more time. He says, "For the Empire," leaving Morgan whispering, "For Dathomir." Her love for her home planet and the prospect of a reborn civilization on said planet is so strong that she is willing to sacrifice herself for it. The Jedi reach Morgan's location, where she stands between them and the Chimera, which is now connected to the Eye of Sion. Ahsoka takes Morgan, allowing Sabine and Ezra to continue, only to encounter an undead Death Trooper each. Sabine is pinned up against a pillar by one of the undead Death Troopers in one of the creepiest scenes in Star Wars. She has shattered part of its helmet with her pistols, and we can now see its zombified jaw and mouth. Super creepy stuff. Anyway, she is pinned where she uses the Force successfully by retrieving her lightsaber and putting the saber through its head. Ezra quickly finishes off the other by beheading it. The Chimera has already started to take off, with it being a distance just out of Ezra's range. Sabine urges him to trust her, as he has a running start and jumps. As he begins to fall, well short of the ship, Sabine gives him a huge force push, allowing Ezra to make it. I was really skeptical of this at first, however I've come up with a few reasons as to how this could be possible. She has finally passed that mental block of using the Force that Kanan mentioned in Rebels. I think a lot of this can be attributed to Ahsoka's vote of confidence in her at the beginning of the episode, as well as everybody being together once more. This also isn't some Mary Sue moment. She has had training from highly trained Force users such as Kanan, Ezra at times, as well as Ahsoka obviously. Huyang mentioned to Ezra that Ahsoka was aware of her potential. I think this could have something to do with Sabine being a part of the Vizsla line, going back to the first Mandalorian Jedi, Vizsla, which I mentioned earlier. She is about to join Ezra on board, however she sees Ahsoka behind her, heavily outnumbered by night troopers alongside Morgan Elsbeth. She remains behind, taking out the night troopers as Ahsoka begins to dominate Elsbeth, eventually taking the Blade of Talzin from her, slicing her midsection with both that blade and her own. Ahsoka's Shoto blade was destroyed in the duel, reminding me of when Morgan disarmed Ahsoka's other blade in their first duel in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. The Chimera fires upon the compound, destroying it just as Ahsoka and Sabine make it on board the repaired T6 Jedi shuttle. They set off in pursuit of Thrawn, where he opens a channel to communicate with Ahsoka. He plays some mind games with her, breaking down his tactics, saying he knows her because he knew her master. He concluded her strategies would be similar. Thrawn goes as far as saying one wonders just how similar she might become, of course referencing Anakin's fall to the dark side. Perhaps this is where a Ronin such as you belong, he continues, meaning that if she followed Anakin's path to the dark side, she wouldn't have access to their galaxy to cause the destruction and terror that Vader and the Empire did. This draws back to the inspiration that George Lucas took from samurais, as a Ronin was a samurai who had no lord or master, and sometimes had no family or clan either. Thrawn jumps to intergalactic hyperspace, leaving them in his dust, so to speak, except for Ezra, who remains on board. Ahsoka, Sabine, and Huyang rejoin the Notis in a somewhat surprisingly content mood. They seem to be hopeful of going home at some point. She looks off into the distance and sees Morai. Now, if you have absolutely no idea who this is, I'll give you a quick explanation. We've seen her in the Clone Wars, Rebels, and Season 2 of The Mandalorian. She's never too far away from Ahsoka in the Clone Wars animated series, where we are introduced to the Mortis gods. The son is the dark side, the father is the balance, and the daughter is the light side, who Morai originally followed. At one point, the son kills Ahsoka before going to kill the father, where the daughter jumps in front of the blade, sacrificing herself. In her last act, she transfers her life force to Ahsoka, reviving her. In doing so, it appears Morai has also been transferred to Ahsoka. Shin, who is probably feeling abandoned, isolated, and scared, travels to the Nomads' camp, igniting her saber, signaling her intent to join them. Baylan is standing on the outstretched hand of a statue of the father. On the right hand side is the son, and on the left is the remains of the daughter statue. I believe this is symbolic of the daughter still living within Ahsoka. The outstretched hand of the father is clearly pointing at something, which we see is a shining light at the top of a mountain. This is exactly what Anakin saw at one point in the Mortis arc, where he reached it and confronted the father there. What is there this time though? It could be Abeloth, which would just be absolutely insane, and shout out to Josh from Den of Nerds, who has been very vocal about his Abeloth theory for weeks. If you don't know who Abeloth is, it would take another video to cover, but I'll try to summarize. She was a mortal woman who served the Ones, being the Mortis gods, and was known as the Mother, trying to keep the peace amongst the other three. She attempted to become immortal and join them, by drinking from the font of power and bathing in the pool of knowledge, which twisted her into an evil being. The father found out and imprisoned her, before leaving the planet they were on and going to Mortis with the son and daughter. Abeloth being freed was never an issue whilst they were alive. However, with them now dead, who knows what could happen. If this were to eventuate, it would be very interesting to see how Abeloth would be presented in canon. Thrawn arrives at Dathomir, where I believe the cargo will be deceased Night Sisters that will be revived on their home planet. He is standing on a balcony overlooking the cargo with the Great Mothers next to him and Captain Enoch behind him. This reminded me a lot of Palpatine overlooking the clone troopers at the end of Attack of the Clones. That was the beginning of the Clone Wars. This will almost definitely be the beginning of another war. Both leaders are overlooking their future soldiers perhaps. Just like George Lucas said, it rhymes. Baylan and Shin's ship arrives at a New Republic fleet, just as it did at the beginning of the season, however this time they obviously are not on board. A Night Trooper uniform walks off as the New Republic soldiers led by Hera raise their weapons. Chopper doesn't seem as alarmed, rolling up to the figure as the helmet comes off, revealing Ezra. Hera can hardly believe it. It really was a beautiful moment, and it meant the absolute world to Rebels fans. Ahsoka and Sabine are settling in with the Notis as Ahsoka reiterates to her Padawan that she did well. He is very content and hopeful of their current situation, saying Ezra is where he needs to be, and so are they. As they walk off, Sabine can feel something, however is unsure of what it is, putting it down to the shadows in the starlight. Ahsoka is aware of what it represents, and as she turns around, we see the Force Ghost of Anakin Skywalker. I was super happy to see him back in his brown Jedi robes as a Force Ghost. I believe there is reasoning for this, which Star Wars Theory has also said as well. When we saw Anakin in white robes in Return of the Jedi, that was shortly after his redemption, and that was as just pure light. Here, he has taken on his role as the balance in the Force, acknowledging both the light and dark within him. However, he now has control over it. What an amazing season. I would rank this at the #1 spot, just over The Mandalorian in terms of Disney Plus live action shows. It was a real Dave Filoni type season finale, with it answering some questions whilst at the same time providing more questions to be asked, leaving it real open-ended. I seriously cannot wait for season 2, which I know hasn't been confirmed yet, but come on guys, we know what's happening. Thrawn's impact on the Mandoverse will be massive, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how his presence will translate to all these other series in the same time period, as we move towards Filoni's movie, which will tie all of this up. Thrawn was wary enough of Ahsoka due to her master. Wait until he discovers that the reigning Jedi Master is Anakin Skywalker's son. The threat of the Grand Admiral's return is the biggest in the galaxy, so one would have to assume that Luke will be involved at some stage. The possibilities really are endless though, as we could see our OT heroes involved, as well as the Ghost Crew, Mando, Grogu, Boba Fett, Bo-Katan, Fennec Shand, etc, etc. There are so many. Cal Kestis and Merrin could even get involved, depending what the plan is for the last game in the Jedi trilogy. That would make for a super interesting storyline, given Merrin is a Night Sister and Dathomir has a role in Thrawn's plans. Imagine the Great Mothers can sense Taron Malicos buried at the tomb of Khajet and bring him back. This actually has some substance to it, as some runes that were located at Thrawn's compound on Peridea were translated and mentioned Khajet. Very interesting. As for Ray Stevenson, I really wish he was still here, so we could see how loved his portrayal of Baylan Skoll was. He really knocked it out of the park. Where his story has been left, you'd have to assume a recast will be done. This will obviously involve diving deeper into the Mortis gods, which I'm super excited about. They are super interesting, and it was one of my favourite arcs in the Clone Wars. Now that the series is over, and this is the final breakdown for a while, I'm going to dive into some of the literature. I've been reading the Vader comics lately, and there is some amazing content in there that I think provides some super cool extra detail to moments in the original trilogy. Until next time though, may the Force be with you, always.